Okay, help us out here. What's your answer?
I put Tompkins.
Okay, why?
Because he basically says if you capture it, then you have it. That's your property. Whereas Livingston says that if you pursue it, then it's yours. Tompkins basically says if you capture it, then it's your property.
Well, why is it certain though? That's my question. I think you gave me the right answer, but what about the majority rule makes it more certain?
Well, what makes it more certain is that he's basing the certainty off Justinian's, Plato, and Braxton, which they all agree that the pursuit alone, even if the party has morally wounded animals, is not enough to create property rights. Which that creates a certain. But at least that's the way I see it.
But you're giving me a very good answer. But why is it? In what way is that approach more certain? Just that's this specific question I'm looking to answer. Certain in what regard?
Certain that you're taking possession of a property.
Certain to whom? Who does it create certainty for?
The person receiving the property, or the person, or the person occupying.
How did we come to even think about this case? What happened here?
They were chasing. Pearson was chasing a fox.
Right, and then what happened?
Post saw the fox and shot it.
And then what happened?
He grabbed it.
And then what happened?
I don't know what he did with it, but he grabbed it and he took possession.
You're killing me. Okay, I'll call someone else. That's is James here?
Yeah, I'm here.
James, in what regard is the majority rule more certain? How is it more certain? You all put the right answer, but how is it more certain?
I wasn't really sure. I guess the reason why I chose Tompkins was because somebody could potentially spend a whole day out hunting, and and if they don't end up capturing it, then they won't get it.
But why is that certain?
Because just because you're going out to hunt and try to capture an animal doesn't guarantee that you're going to get it.
Okay, I guess it didn't click from last class. Natasha, you here, Natasha?
Yes, I'm here.
Natasha, 94% of you put A, which is the correct answer. So almost all of you got this right. I'd like someone to explain why is that the right answer? Why is it A?
Well, for the pursuit theory, the problem is that we don't actually know what happened. Anybody can say anything.
Okay, go on your exact right track. So why is the capture rule more certain?
Because the person actually has the possession of the property.
And who can use that? Who can use that fact in a helpful way?
The judges and the judges.
Exactly. Oh, thank you, Natasha. Perfect. So the question I was asking Matthew was certain to whom, and the answer is the courts. Right? I kept asking, what happens next? What happens next? Post sued Pearson. He went to court and said, no, that's my fox. And the court says, well, you don't have the fox. The other guy has the fox. He wins. He caught it. He has the evidence. Right? Think of the Papa Hayashi case. Hayashi had the ball. He was holding it up to the world to show on camera. The capture rule is certain. When you capture one of these wild resources, it's yours. You have the world to show. You can hold in your hands. It's your fox. It's your duck. It's your whale. It's your coal. It's your oil, right? It's your resource. It's your water, right? You took it. So the advantage of the capture rule is it's very easy to apply. There's a lot of certainty involved, right? There's no doubt that you are the person with the foxes in your hands. All right, so almost all of you got that right. Only 33 out of 35 of you who voted got that question right, which is good. But you need to explain why, right? The exam is not multiple choice. It's going to be essay. And unless you can explain why the rule is what you says it is, why the rule is what you put, you won't get full credit. So think very carefully when I say why, right? It's not just the what, it's the why. That's what in law school, that's what separates the good from the best students, right? Most law students can tell you what the answer is. The much harder question is, why is that the answer? Right? You always think of a toddler, daddy, why? That's the important question. Why? The what, anyone with a commercial outline can know the what, but the why is where you distinguish yourself. All right. Any questions in that first poll? Let's try the second poll. See what happens with this one. This is question number 2. All right. So here's your question. Which rule from Pearson is more fair? The majority by Judge Tompkins or the dissent by Judge Livingston? Okay. And I believe I just called on Natasha's. I think Paul. Are you here, Paul?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Paul. I think just about everyone voted. What's your answer here?
Judge Livingston.
Okay, so you said the dissent.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me why you put the dissent, please.
Well, it kind of goes back to that whole labor theory where you can sit there chasing an animal for however long and not even actually have the opportunity to get it, because at the very end somebody still like what happened in this case. So it would be a disincentive to people to even go hunting or to do anything if they can instantly lose the animal that they've been chasing over.
Okay, so I want to make sure you heard you right. You said the dissenting opinion is more fair because it involves labor theory. Can you just remind everyone what is labor theory?
Like it's kind of like if you put the work into it, it's yours.
Okay. So you said the dissent is more fair because it rewards work, right? That we know that Post spent all this time hunting and he's rewarded for his work. So that's why you put B?
Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you a follow-up question, Paul. How do we know how much work Post actually put into the hunt?
Well, that's the issue, is that you don't, because there is no way of actually proving that. But in terms of fairness.
But is it actually fair to reward someone who lies about how much work they put into the hunt?
I think so. I mean, they were talking about it's going to be a disincentive. They're talking about how foxes are nuisances to the overall people. So if you sit there and tell people that you can chase a fox all day and not actually get it because somebody else takes it from you, then it would be more of a disincentive to public as a whole.
All right. Did anyone put A for this one? They want to raise their hand, please? I know at least 6 of you did. Willie, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I chose A because I think from an internal locus of control, let's say you have two.
Oh, hold on. You said internal locus of control. That's a very big phrase. I need to know what you're talking about there.
Right. So fair, right? Fair is, when you think about fair, it's like, okay, what's fair to society and what's fair to the person?
Okay. Let me just stop you there. So you're saying that there's not a single definition of fair, right? It's a 4-letter word that begins with an F, right?
Right.
There are different definitions of fair. There's fair for society and fair for individuals. So develop that, please.
External locus of control is where you believe that you're not in control of capturing the fox and their external circumstances, and you give weight to those external circumstances. Internal locus of control is like, if I caught the fox or not, it was on me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I can give an example, you have two people running a race. One person that ran the race trained a lot, worked really hard, fulfilled all this labor, right? Then you have another person who's just naturally more gifted, and they race, right? And the more gifted person wins. Somebody that believes in the dissent might say that the loser put in more work. It's more fair, right? And I believe in that you have to fulfill, like winners win, right? You have to fulfill.
So if you're a gifted hunter, if you're a talented hunter, you can hunt the fox in 5 minutes, and some other guy's banging his head for an entire day to sucky hunter, right? You don't always reward the person who puts more labor into it. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah, it's about getting the objective done, right? It's fair if you capture the animal, irrespective of how long you chase the animal, right? Because at the beginning or the onset of the hunt, it's you and the animal, and it's like a competition, and everyone has the same opportunity to hunt. So as long as you capture it, you've completed, it. That's fair.
Okay.
I believe that's fair.
All right. I see Aaron, have your hands up. Go ahead, Aaron.
He basically said what I was going to say, that fairness is very amorphous. Like, what does that mean? So I interpret it as what's most just, which would be what's the clearest, what's the, I don't know.
So you think the certain approach is the fairest approach?
Yeah.
So the bright line rule, the capture rule, is easy to apply, and you think that's the rule that ought to be applied?
Yeah, because if there's one rule, everybody knows it. That's what's fair.
So I think you're saying the same thing, that it's fair for the individual versus fair for the society as a whole. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I see. Grant, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just curious what you think of the first note, which seems to suggest that there's a hidden class issue. And if there is a class issue, that distorts the whole fairness question, I would say.
Tell me what you think about it.
I don't know. It's new to me, the case. I can't make a judgment. I suspect there usually is. But I would reserve judgment.
Well, look, I think I can try maybe bring, Grant, your comment back to the discussion that we're having more broadly. There's no one definition of fair, and fair for party A is unfair for party B. I use an example in constitutional law, which I'll just bring in here. Imagine you have imagine you're a sheep, right? And there's a wolf, and the wolf is your oppressor, right? The wolf is trying to kill you, and the shepherd is saving you from the wolf, right? So the shepherd is your guardian, right? So the shepherd is the person keeping you alive. Okay. Now imagine you're the wolf. You're hungry, right? You want a sheep to eat, and the shepherd is stopping you from eating and not letting you eat, right? Often what seems fair and just depends on where you sit and where you are. Now, wolf and sheep, foxes, these stupid, animal analogies, but I think that helps get there. I think, Emily, I saw a hand up a minute ago.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar and just also add to it that, fairness is really hard to determine when nobody owns the playing field, so to speak.
So there's no ration solely. There's no ownership of the land, is what you're in this case.
Right. So like if we're fishing in the ocean or whatever, and some guy's been out there all day and another dude's been there for 10 minutes and catches a bunch of fish. That doesn't make the lucky fisherman.
Okay.
That doesn't make the results of the lucky fisherman fairer or not fairer to me than the guy who's been there all day.
All right, very good. I see Derek. I'll call in Derek, then move on to the next question. All right, Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to offer a counter argument is that if we're creating this new fairness in terms of the capture rule and you have to actually possess it, what you're going to have, I think, over time is a bunch of hunters just sitting and waiting and no one actually doing any hunting. So I think that the plaintiff in this case was, I think he's looking out for what the majority of the people who participate in this activity have agreed to, or what they find the social value in doing this activity is. And so now we have someone introducing a new concept into the race per se. And what you're going to find, I think, over time is that people are not going to be satisfied. They're not going to get the social value out of the activity by sitting around and waiting for someone else to spook the deer or spook the fox. So I think, right now it works for the courts, but I don't know what happened. I think we'll get there if I keep reading the book, but
it won't make any more sense. You're too optimistic. Okay. There are no answers in this book. There's only more questions. All right. Very, very good. Thank you, Derek. That's an excellent comment. All good comments around. I appreciate the discussion. So for question 2, the textbook answer is B, right? If you want to go with what usually is the answer, but I'll give credit for A also. I think that they both are fair in different regards. I think the more conventional answer that you'll see in most sources is B. That's a dissent, the labor theory. But I think there are definitely, in some respects, the way that the labor theory is not fair. You can say that a bright line rule is more certain, is more fair for reasons a couple of you mentioned. All right. Any more thoughts on that? I want to move on to the new stuff. All right. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Doesn't the labor theory kind of add uncertainty a little bit?
Oh, it's definitely uncertain. That's no questions. That's absolutely right.
Okay, making sure.
Yep. All right, let's try number 3. And let's see how you do with this one. This is it seems easy, but it's not. State the rule of capture without using the word capture. We're going to struggle with this one, I promise, but I want you at least to try to, in a single sentence, state the rule of capture and try not to use the word capture in your definition because that's just circular. It's harder than it thinks. Okay, and this is going to be for, let's see who's next. They called him Paul. Azrael will be next in about 30 seconds. All right. I think just what all of you put answers in. If you didn't, please do so now. All right, Azrael, help us out here. If you had to define the role of capture in a single sentence, how would you define it?
Well, not being able to use the word capture was pretty hard.
I know. I'm sorry. That was mean. But
I didn't know which word to use. Basically, the first person to take possession, ownership, whatever word we want to use, is of a natural resource is the person who owns it.
Okay.
And I know you're going to ask what owns and possession means, but
oh, you know my tricks already. Yeah. That's exactly right. And I'm just looking down the poll. Whoever gets to it first owns it. Whoever possesses it first owns it. Whoever gets there first owns it. Who physically possesses it. The rule of capture can be stated a million ways, but it requires some shared definition of what possession is. It requires some shared definition of what ownership is. And I think what the first 2 weeks of class have shown you, or at least should show you, is that there's no shared definition of what ownership or possession means. Indeed, the reason why these disputes go to courts is because there's no shared understanding of these terms. If everyone agreed what possession is, there would be no disputes in court. People would just know what to do. They would resolve, any sort of conflicts on their own. But precisely because people don't agree, they go to court and they ask judges to give a definition of occupancy. So in the baseball case, pop-off, right? Is it when you stop the momentum of the ball, or when you actually physically secure possession that's not knocked out of your hands, that you secure the ball, right? In the whale case, is it when you put your flag in it, when you put an iron in it, or just piercing it with your lance, right? In the duck case, is it your ducks because it's on your property, or perhaps someone interfering with your trade? In the fox case, is it only the person who gets the fox, or perhaps you mortally wounded, or maybe set a trap? There are many different tests to discuss when you capture property. And we'll have even more of them today for resources like oil and water, right? But what I want to get to you is that there's not going to be a single definition of the rule of capture. Someone's going to ask me, Josh, what's the rule of capture in a sentence? I'm like, you can't do it. You need to define the rule of capture in relation to these various tests, right? You need to know each of these tests. That's the short answer. For water, there are different tests. For oil, there are different tests. For big animals, there's a test. For little animals, there's a test, right? Apparently for baseball, there's a test, right? There's tests for everything. There's not a single definition. But I'm scrolling through what you all put. I think you're all absolutely on the right track. And Azrael totally anticipated what I was going to say. He knew my follow-up question. He got that one in advance, which is good. Any questions so far? No? All right. Let's talk for a bit about natural resources, oil and gas, and then we'll do water a little bit later. One of the limitations of judges, and this is not just old judges, this is old judges, is that they aren't always able to deal with new technologies, right? New situations. Judges have this desire to make all new matters like old cases, right? When there's some sort of new innovation, new dispute, judges say, well, this is similar to what we did last year, so let's view it in the same regard. And this is largely how oil and gas law developed. In the 1800s, when people first started drilling for oil, disputes arose over who would have ownership over oil from the ground. And judges said, aha, well, I have an idea. Let's treat oil the same way we would treat a wild animal. Huh? Aaron, help us out here. Why would judges in the 1800s start to compare oil in the ground to a duck or a fox or a whale? Why on earth would they make this sort of comparison?
Because it's not directly connected to what the property owner owns. They only own the top of the land, and it moves. It's kind of a
what's that word?
Unclaimed resource.
What's the word the book uses to describe oil that moves around? It's a word that you wouldn't think of using, but they use this word.
Yeah, I remember. Let me see.
It is a very common term. Begins with an F.
Fugitive?
That's it. That's it. Why did they call oil a fugitive resource? What does it mean to be a fugitive, Aaron?
Be running, to be sought after.
Yeah, someone's chasing you, right? Are you tied to any one particular place as a fugitive?
Nope.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so in the early days of oil and gas law, judges said, you know what? We have these cases about foxes, which are fugitives. It doesn't mean criminal, right? It just means you're on the run, so to speak. Right? You think of a fugitive like a criminal, someone who like broke out of jail. It doesn't have to be that way, right? A fugitive here is something that's on the run. Oil is not tied to any one particular place, right? Oil is not tied to any one particular place. It moves around, right? The very nature of oil is it seeps. It sort of spills on this side and spills on that side. And if you drill here, it shoots into the air. If you drill there, it shoots into the air, right? It's everywhere, right? So courts began to treat oil as if it was a fere naturae. That's that term I keep saying. I'm sorry, but you're going to need to know it. Fere naturae, right? This wild animal. And with the fere naturae doctrine, you have our other favorite. Oh, it keeps doing the autocorrect. Our other favorite doctrine, rationing solely. Right? Emily, are you here, Emily?
Yes, I am.
Emily, oh yeah, I called you before. That's right, I know you're here. Emily, what's the rationing solely doctrine, please?
Rationing solely refers to the notion that ownership of a wild animal, that the owner of the land has constructive ownership of a wild animal.
Exactly. Exactly. And you said
the animal takes off.
Exactly. You said constructive ownership, right? Just help us out here. What does constructive ownership mean?
Well, it means that you might not have it like in your hand and like physically in your hand, but it's within your control. It's within somewhere that you control.
Okay, that's good. So let me ask you a follow-up, Emily. What happens if a fox is on your land and you're chasing it and it runs onto your neighbor's property? What happens?
It's not yours anymore.
Exactly. Perfect, right? So the nature of the ration solely doctrine is so long as something is on your land, it's yours. Now, oil doesn't exist above ground. It exists below ground. It's what's called a subsurface rights. Subsurface rights, right? When you buy a piece of land, you're not just buying the surface rights, you're also buying the subsurface rights. And you can sell them separately. Maybe you keep the surface rights for yourself and you sell the subsurface rights to a drilling company, right? You can do that. That's you're allowed to do, right? So when the oil is under your ground, under the doctrine of rationing solely, it should be yours. You have constructive possession, right? If the oil is not under your ground, if the well dries out, then there's nothing to have anymore. Now, Angelina, let me ask you, you here, Angelina?
Yes.
So let me ask you a question, please. A fox is, one animal, right? And a fox can go here and a fox can go there, right? It's very difficult for a fox to exist on two pieces of property at the same time. I guess the fox can on the border, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Does oil always stay within one property?
No.
Tell me why.
It moves from place to place. It's just constantly moving. It's just.
So you're saying that oil can constantly move from place to place. Let me ask you a question. What happens if you have a pool of oil that stretches over two pieces of property? Who owns it then? Who has constructive possession if you have a pool of oil that's very big and it stretches under two pieces of property?
Whoever captures the oil first.
You grab it with your hands? I mean, how do you capture oil?
You extract it.
Yeah, but what if you extract some of it and there's not all, and there's still some left over into the other guy's property? Is every single drop of oil you have to capture?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you have to capture every single drop of oil to have the rule of capture?
Not necessarily. Just whatever you extract from the land is whatever is yours.
All right, Alec, you here, Alec?
Yes, I'm here.
Alec, let me ask you a similar question to I asked Angelina. What happens if you have a pool of oil that starts under your land and it sort of migrates and shifts to your neighbor's property? In other words, it was under yours, and then due to the natural forces of Earth, it sort of moves to the next lot over. Whose oil is it?
It would be your neighbor's. I mean,
okay.
Unless you had already started drilling it, then.
Yeah, but what if you started drilling it and then it moved and it's no longer under yours? It was an earthquake or something, and it goes to your neighbor's lot.
Then, then you kind of be out of luck there. If you'd already started drilling it and it moved, then if it's no longer on your property, then I don't really. As long as a portion of it exists in your property, I'm sure you'd be able to drill it. But if it's completely out of your property, then it would no longer be yours.
All right, thanks, Alex. Alec, I'm sorry. My sister's name is Alex, so I may slip on that one. The questions I gave to Alec and Angelina are very common, right? So if you go to page 44 in your books, please, there are a bunch of questions which I think are helpful. You're going to take a class in oil and gas law at some point in your law school career. So this is just like a brief introduction. I don't even want to try to explain the entire doctrine here because it's an entire semester, and I don't want to kill you with it. But you have to think about a couple of different common problems, right? One is what happens if there's what's called a common pool, right? There's a large pool of oil that stretches under A's lot and B's lot. Right? The more traditional rule, right, in the earlier, and this is not common law versus modern, so don't see it this way, but earlier in the oil boom, the rule is you can both tap it, right? If there's a lot under two pieces of property, you can both drill, Okay. Now, Tyler, are you here? Tyler? No? Willie, I think I saw you earlier. You here?
Yeah.
So, Willie, let me ask you a question. What's the obvious problem if you have a single pool of oil and then two neighbors are drilling at the same time? What's just the obvious thing that's going to happen in that case, the obvious problem?
You can take away interest from the owner of the adjacent property.
Oh, yeah. So let's just say, Willie, let's say you and I are neighbors, right? And there's one pool of oil. And you find out, oh, no, Blackman's drilling, right? What are you going to do?
What was that, Mr. Blackman? What?
You find out that I'm drilling, right? And you're next to me. What do you think you're going to do in response? You find that I'm drilling.
Drill as fast and hard as I can, right?
Why?
To retain value in the oil.
You're going to try and empty the well, aren't you?
Right.
Why are you going to try and empty it out?
Incentive of over drilling.
Exactly, because you want to beat me, right? Because every drop of, oil is a finite resource, right? There's only X barrel in a well. And every drop that you get is a drop I don't get. And every drop I get means you don't get it. So it creates a lot of excessive drilling because there's an incentive to try and empty out the well. All right, thanks, Willie. So what some of the later, more modern courts have held, and again, I don't say it's just common or modern, it's not that clean, but some of the more modern cases said you can both drill, but if one side drills too much excessively and is trying to empty out the well, you can get an injunction to stop it. Don't try to think about this too hard because it'll take an entire semester on this, but the courts have, and it's not just courts, but courts and legislators have said it doesn't help anyone to have this massive race to drilling where you just empty it out. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Is that why they created spacing laws? So they wouldn't have this problem?
You want to tell us what spacing laws are?
Basically, spacing laws, whenever you have two or multiple drillers and they're too close together, so you space them out.
Okay, very good. Yeah, and that actually helps bring me to my next point. Thanks, Matthew. When you drill, in most states, Texas for one, you have laws that say you can't drill too close together, right? There has to be a certain amount of space between wells. And the reason why is for sort of this crowding. Now, the second question I want to ask is what's called slant drilling. I think it's paragraph B on page 44. So everyone see this graphic here? Let me make it a little bit bigger so you can see it, okay? Right? The general rule is that you can drill straight down, right? You can drill straight down to your well. But often what happens is people will put a curve, what's called a slant. And they'll try and put a drill to go steal from the neighboring property, right? And they put their pipes into the neighboring property. So you don't see from the surface that they're stealing the neighboring property. If you ever watched the Simpsons, there was a funny episode where they made it very obvious where Mr. Burns had a slant drilling. He had a 45-degree angle, right? That is not allowed. That's a trespass. Right, that's a trespass. It's prohibited to drill another piece of land. Why? Because you're literally trespassing on their property. You're putting your drill into their land. Now, technology has gotten developed such that you don't actually need to drill onto their land. It's possible to drill close to their border, right, where their lot begins, and use pressure to suck the oil through the earth onto your land, right? You can actually use pressure to take an oil from A and give to B. That's also illegal now. And states have enacted the spacing laws that Matthew mentioned, which means you can't get so close that you can basically suck out their oil without trespassing. So the law has developed in such a way that that you're able to prevent some of the sort of exploitation. It's not perfect, right? It's not, it's not always going to help, right? But you're able to prevent the sort of exploitation in many cases. All right. Any questions on that? That's all I want to say about oil. There's so much more. I can't do it in an introductory 1L class, but definitely take Professor Kuhlander and others, and you'll learn a lot more about oil later in your law school career. Okay, any questions on oil? All right, let's talk about water for a bit. Maybe water is more relevant to most people because you've never involved in oil drilling, but we all drink, right? We all need to survive. Water is a very essential element of life. And different rules have developed to discuss the capture of water. Water is a fugitive resource. It moves from place to place. Water can be on the surface and it can be subsurface. You can have these very large lakes that border many properties. You can have, tiny creeks. You can have streams. There are different types of water. Who's next? Zach, you here, Zach?
Yeah, I'm here.
So, Zach, help us out here. We have these 3 rules that the book discusses. We have the what's called the English rule. We have what's called the American rule, the Eastern rule, and the Western rule. All right, let's just start us out by going. What was the English rule?
The English rule was that you could essentially pump whatever water you could pump.
Yeah.
And
so if you got to So if you got to a pool of water, was there any limit what you could take?
No.
Okay.
And to me, that's just English stupidity because
come on.
There's not much water in
Be
it.
nice. Be nice. Don't say stupid.
There's not much water in England to begin with. So this really is a free-for-all situation.
Okay.
Which isn't healthy.
Okay. So it's a free-for-all means people can drain all the water and you might run out of water. Is that what you're getting at?
Basically. That's what I got, that the English rule was, that there was no rule.
That's right. Yeah, there really is no rule. Thanks, Zach. That's right. If you see water, right, and you were there first, it's yours. And you can take as much as you want. Now, I mean, what does it mean? Go ahead.
Sorry. I did have a question. I don't know if you can answer it. What did this have to do with, do you know if this had anything to do with the expansion of the United Kingdom beyond England into Ireland and Scotland?
I presume the rule applied throughout the United Kingdom.
Okay.
That's my presumption. I'm not sure, but I think that's the rule.
Okay.
I'm not sure. No one ever asked me before. It's a good question. Right. So the English rule led to a free-for-all. And it wasn't mean to be there first, right? England's been around for a very long time. That means your ancestors were there first. So once you establish these sort of rights, they sort of linger forever. Okay. Catherine, you here?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, you're loud and clear. Thanks, Catherine. You want to help us? What's the Eastern rule? The eastern part of the United States?
The eastern states, they were talking about riparian land.
Right, riparian means water. It's a fancy word.
Yeah, so it's like the people next to the water source, and they have the right to use the water source subject to the rights of the other people that are near the water source. And it's kind of similar to the rule of capture because it's like whoever got there first, whoever acquired it by first possession.
Right. So it's sort of like a rule of capture, right? Where if you're near the water, you have the right to use it. But you can have multiple people tapping the water in different places. So you imagine it's a very long river, right? And, my house is on this side and your house is on that side, and we both tap it in each of our sides, right? Catherine, what might be the risk be of the English of the Eastern rule? Why might that be potentially problematic?
I feel like it could be problematic because, I feel like it would lead to pollution. And the other people, maybe the people around the water, they'll use it for their use, but kind of not really care about the other people that might need to use the water.
Yeah, and I think, thank you, Catherine. I think a related issue is if you have too many people building, wells and different ways to extract the water, it can create conflicts. People start fighting with each other. It's like, no, that's mine. No, it's mine. And start fighting, right? But the Eastern rule is still very permissive. A lot of people can tap water and might be a free for all. In the eastern part of the United States, there's a lot more water. But in the western part of the United States, it was more dry, and there was less water. Water was more valuable. So, Pierce, you here?
Yes.
So, Pierce, what rule developed in the western part of the United States? The Western rule, so as it's called.
Prior appropriation.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's the rule of capture.
Okay, so how is it different than the Eastern rule then?
Here, you also take into consideration if you're using the water in a beneficial way.
What does it mean in a beneficial way?
I guess that you're just not wasting it. I guess maybe in the sense that you're not taking it, you're using it for a purpose.
Okay, so what happens if you were the first one there, but then you start wasting the water and I don't know, doing something stupid with it? You're just polluting it and you're doing bad stuff with it, right? Can the court stop you?
Under this, yes. Under the Western rule.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Right. Thank you, Pierce. The biggest difference between the Eastern and the Western rule is the court considers what's called beneficial use. Right. Out west, the courts will say, "Are you using this water? Are you using the water beneficially? Right? Or are you wasting it?" Even if you were there first and you're wasting it, the court could direct you to give it to others, and others have a right to it. Because it's water's at a much higher premium because there's just less of it in the western parts of the United States. Okay, that's all I want to do on water law. It's an important topic and there's a lot to study, but that's all we have time for. Any questions on that on the different tests, the English versus the Eastern and Western rules? No? Okay, I'll move on. All right. We are done for now with the rule of capture. I think we've beaten it to death. I want to move on from the rule of capture, acquisition by capturing it, to another type of acquisition. Acquisition by creation. Right? So far, all we've done is when you find something in the wild, whether it's a fox or a duck or a whale or oil or water, and you take something from the commons, right? Right, you're taking some wild resource from the commons. The next case I want to talk about is not taking something from the commons. It's making something from the commons. It's creating something. Is it Brian? Brian, you here? No? Bradley, you here?
Yes, sir, I am.
Bradley, this will sound like a dumb question. I promise there's a point here. What does it mean to create something?
I mean,
I know it sounds like a dumb question, but there's something here.
I would say to create would be to, I guess, kind of some sort of like idea or I don't know, something that comes out of like the original, like out of your mindset. That's like you bring to fruition or bring to life something that is like an object idea or like something of that sort of sense. I guess.
Okay, so you're bringing some idea to fruition. I think you said. What do you use to create something? I know this sounds like a really dumb question, but there's a purpose behind it.
My computer froze there.
That's okay. I'll ask it again. What do you have to use to create something? Can you just use your mind? Is that enough? I created something.
Yeah, arguably you could just use your mind. Obviously, you can use materials.
Okay, that's what I'm getting. Can you to actually? I mean, you can have an idea, which is lovely. We all have ideas, but to actually bring it to reality, what do you need?
Yeah.
No, what
with material.
materials? And where do you get materials from?
I guess from the world, just as is, you can get anything.
And how do you obtain those materials, or how do you capture those materials? See where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah.
There it is. Now it's
I guess just try to be the first one to make a claim to it of getting that
right.
sort of
So let's say you chop down a tree, right? If you want to make something out of wood, right? Or maybe you have to take a stone and you chisel. I'm using old, or maybe find clay and you mold it, or you find some metal in the earth and you forge it, right? Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bradley. What I'm getting at, everyone, is that the act of creation depends on having some materials, right? You have to convert some materials. You put some effort into it, labor, right? You put some labor into it, and then you make something, a ball or a box or a hammer or a knife or an axe, whatever you want to make. The creation doctrine is very much attuned to the labor theory, to Locke's labor theory. John Locke wrote that you own the fruits of your labor, that when you put labor into something, you mix your labor with some sort of material, the byproduct is yours. But that still skips the question of who owned the material in the first place, right? Everything in this semester goes back to first possession, which is why we start with foxes and whales, right? Everything goes back to who owned the material first, right? Maybe you can buy some metal or buy some wood or something, but where'd that person get it from, right? Eventually, at some point, every question reduces to a capture question. No matter how far we go in this semester, we will not escape the role of capture. I'm sorry. It's always sort of lurking in the background. There's always this sort of first possession, the root of possession, which is ownership. And what is ownership? Well, we've been through that already. Questions so far? All right. I'm going to come back to the INSVAP case in a minute. I want to actually start by going through the various types of intellectual property. I promise I'll come back to the INS case. I think it'll make more sense if we do the other things first, because it's a very confusing. I hate this case. It's one of the worst cases in the book. Just it's not because the editors were bad. Just the justice who wrote it was not very smart. Sorry, this is my comma bleeding. This is Justice Pitney, who's fairly inconsequential, and he wrote a very bizarre opinion that's hard to understand. Not all the justices were equally skilled. In fact, Justice Holmes and Justice Brandeis wrote excellent dissents, which are not in your book, which they should be. I reread them last night. They're fantastic. But the majority opinion was not very good. But let's talk about IAP for a minute. I encourage you all to consider taking a class later in law school in intellectual property. Dean Field teaches it. I think Professor Page teaches it also occasionally. Intellectual property is a type of property right created by the government, right? The federal government assigns property rights for certain types of inventions, discoveries, writings. The Constitution gives the federal government the power to reward people who are creative. And it gives them something very special, right? Intellectual property means that you have some idea, and because you were there first, so to speak, no one else can use that idea, right? If you were the first to copyright something, you get a monopoly on that copyright. If you were the first to trademark something, you get a monopoly on that trademark. If you're the first to patent something, you get a monopoly. In other words, people can't copy your stuff because you had the invention first or you had the idea first. At the most basic level, intellectual property rewards your creativity by giving you a limited monopoly on that idea. You invested the labor, you put the creativity into it, and therefore you should benefit from it. All right. Everyone with me so far? All right, let me run through these, and I'm just going to read them because there's not much discussion here. There are 1, 2, 3. There are 3 primary types of intellectual property I want to talk about. There's a lot more, but I'll talk about 3 now. The first one is called copyright. Copyright is a way for the government to protect your ideas. For example, if you write a book, or you write an article, or you paint a portrait, right? Music, you write a song, you write lyrics. It's about protecting the idea. It has to be in some sort of tangible medium. That is, has to be in writing or on paper or even electronic. It has to be fixed. It can't just be in your head. It has to be put in some sort of tangible form. Copyrights last for a long time. Under the current law, a copyright can last for 70 years after the author's death. So if you were to write a book, you guys are in your 20s, let's say you live to be 100 years old, the copyright would last 70 years after you die. So we're talking almost 200 years a copyright can last, depending how long you live. Eventually, old stuff comes into what's called the public domain. Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare, for example, he died many, many, many years ago. So there's no copyright over Shakespeare's work. It's in the public domain. As things stand now, we're now in the year 2020. Stuff that was created about 100 years ago is starting to come to the public domain. Right? Every year on January 1st, there's like a release. Like, here are the songs we can now sing that are now in the public domain. So, movies from the 20s and 30s are coming to the public domain, but it takes a while. How do you get a copyright? I see your hand, Zach, in just 1 second. How do you get a copyright? There are 3 general requirements. 1, your idea must be original, right? It has to be something new. You can't copyright something that's copyrighted before. Second, it has to fit into different categories. It could be literary work, a musical work, dramatic work, a motion picture, sound, but it has to be something that's fixed, right? That's the 3rd requirement. It has to be printed. It can't just be an idea or a concept. It has to be something that exists in the real world. And the copyrights can last for a very long time. Even like Mickey Mouse, right? Walt Disney's been dead for half a century, and Mickey Mouse is still copyrighted. I think actually the Minnie Mouse copyright is going to be ending soon. But it's been a long process. All right, Zach, your hand was up a minute ago.
Yeah, Nicole was first.
Oh, I'm sorry, Nicole. I didn't see her. Nicole, please go ahead.
It's okay. You answered my question, actually.
Good. Like when that happens. Okay. Which question, Zach?
So what happens when a copyright is made by a group of people, like say the Stones or the Beatles?
Right.
Obviously, some of the Beatles are still alive, but John Lennon's not. So has the timer started when John Lennon?
I think if it's a joint copyright, you go whoever dies latest, and you add 70 years to that one.
Okay.
Right. I'm actually not positive on that one, but I think that's probably what you would do, because you do have groups that co-author a song together. I think if it's a joint effort, you go to the later date.
Okay.
Yeah, Bennett, go ahead.
What was the requirement for copyright? I have idea must be original, fit into different categories. And then what was number 3?
Number 3 has to be fixed. Has to be in some sort of medium that you can have, like a painting or a portrait or a picture, even a CD-ROM, right? It can't just be in your head. You have to actually have it reduced. It has to exist in the real world. Yep, my pleasure. All right, let me do the second one. The second type I want to talk about, which is the patent. The patent's a little bit different. The patent is for a sort of a new invention. It doesn't have to be something that is sort of fixed, right? You can have an idea for some sort of a new process or a new product, and a machine, a process, right? And you can get a patent for it. So, I mean, the classic example is you create like a design for a new pharmaceutical drug, right? Or a new COVID vaccine, right? You create some new invention. And these patents are good for up to 20 years. So this is why very often you see various pharmaceutical drugs, after 20 years, a generic comes out because the patent expired and people can just copy it, right? So it's a limited monopoly for about 20 years. You get 2 decades, which no one else can copy your design, right? The third IP I want to talk about, IP is intellectual property. The third IP I want to talk about is what's called a trademark. A trademark can be a word, a name, or a symbol. So think of like Volkswagen, right, or Pepsi Cola, or M&M, or even like the Nike swoosh, right, the little check mark. These are words and symbols that identify specific goods in the marketplace, right? So when you see the Nike swoosh, you know it's Nike. You don't even see any letters. It's Nike. When you see, the Pepsi logo, or you see, the Apple, it's for an Apple computer, right? These are very distinctive logos. It's designed to eliminate confusion, right? So when you have a trademark, you're registering with the government. People can't use that mark without your permission. And these marks can last much longer, right? They're not limited by time. So long as you're still using your mark, you get to keep it. If you abandon it, that's another process. You can press abandon it. But Nike can use that swoosh for 100 years, and that's just fine. That's their mark, and you can't get there. But to get this sort of mark, you have to be the first one to use it, right? If you're the first one to use it in trade, then it's yours. And registering a trademark is not very complicated. You basically have to fill out a few forms with the government, and it takes not very long. But it's your mark. Okay. Questions on those 3? Yeah, Nicole, go ahead.
I have a question about patents. So since it doesn't have to be a fixed idea, what do you bring to try and get this patent? It's just like your design, I guess it's used a lot for like engineers too, like where they're designing some kind of software. So it's just like the plans for it. It's not an actual
software is a little bit tricky.
product.
Software is tricky. Just say hardware instead of software. But you often have to submit diagrams, right? Schematics, things that describe what it is and how it would function, right? It's not always necessary to have actually built it, because often building it's very complicated. But if you have the plan designs for it, you with the blueprint perhaps of a different kind of invention. Yeah, Matt,
Okay,
go
thank
ahead. Yeah, my pleasure. Matt, then Zach.
Did you kind of explain non-functionality, which is one of the requirements for trademark protection?
Right. The trademarks have to be distinguished from a patent, right? A patent is some sort of functional design that actually does something, right? Has utility. It can actually offer some sort of benefit. Trademarks are just about identifying the good, right? It's a way of describing a name. But if you're actually discussing something that can provide a benefit to people, right, it actually does something, then you have to use a patent, right? It's often where's the line between one form of IP and another. It's a lot easier to get a trademark than it is to get a patent. So people try and say everything's a trademark. But trademarks are really just a name or a symbol to identify something. If it's actually, if it's actually discussing how to accomplish something, right, a process, you have to go to the other one, patent.
Isn't intellectual property pretty expensive to obtain?
What do you mean obtain for whom? Are you trying to get a patent, you're saying, or to?
Yeah, like to trademark something, to patent something, to get a
trademarks are not
copyright, isn't it?
expensive. I think the fee is under $1,000 for a trademark. For patents, I'm not sure what the fee is, but it's a lot more complicated to get it to prepare your application correctly, because you need to have some sort of scientific background, which not everyone has. But I mean, you can go to LegalZoom tomorrow and register a trademark for a few $100s. It's not terribly expensive. It's under $1,000. Yeah, Bennett, go ahead.
question. For you to infringe on someone's trademark, would you have to profit off of it, or can you just use it if you're, I don't know, having a lemonade sale and you put it on your banner right there, or are you having to make money off of it?
You know, if I think if I'm selling a cell phone, I put an Apple logo on it, I'm gonna get sued. I don't know that you have to actually make money because maybe your sales are not successful, but simply by marketing a device with someone else's logo on it, you're infringing their trademark. Yep, thank you. What else? Yep, Malika, Natasha, go ahead.
For movies, would it not be the like production company like Warner Bros. That would copyright it?
Usually, yeah, it's usually assigned to a company.
So then the death wouldn't be like the person's death.
Right. Yeah. Well, even though you assign a copyright to a company, you're still having a human being who created it, right? A company can't actually create it on itself. So you have the person who actually created it, and then it's assigned to Warner Brothers or Sony or wherever else.
Okay, so when like the director, let's just say,
yeah, it's a very complicated question of who it gets assigned to, which is far beyond of where I want to see your interest in that, which is far beyond where I want to go today. But you generally have a person who writes it, and then a company they assign the rights to it. So like Elvis is dead, but there's still a company that manages Elvis's copyrights, or maybe Elvis is not dead. I don't know if depends where you are. Paul, go ahead.
So in terms of the patent law, do you have exclusive control for like the 20 years? So like whenever it comes down to like drug prices or generic medicines, is there a situation where they can start working on it before those 20 years are up, or it has to be once the 20 years are up, they can start doing research?
Well, what usually happens is the generic companies start preparing their generics in advance of the 20 years, and as soon as the 20 years is up, they put it on market.
So that's all. I just wanted to know if they had exclusive control, nobody else could.
Look, the idea of the patent is you can buy the pill on a pharmacy, do an analysis of it, figure out the composition, and then make a copy, right? I mean, one of the elements of having a patent is you have to share to the world exactly what this is, right? You have very detailed instructions, and once people notice, they can copy it, right? Once you release your product to the world, you can't keep it a secret anymore. This is actually a good connection to our next case. Right, it's there. People can see what the medicines. They can figure out what's inside of it, but the law prohibits them from copying it during that 20-year period. All right, Bennett. Then we'll move on to the next case.
When something goes into the public domain, is it able to be purchased to the highest bidder, or is it just for everyone?
It's like the air; anyone can use it. So if I want to, play a movie from the early 20th century, I don't need permission. I can just do it. If I want to make a copy of Romeo and Juliet or a Shakespeare book, I don't need permission from the Shakespeare family. I don't know whether that family would exist anymore, but you just do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Which brings us to the case today. Again, I told you I don't like teaching this. I mean, I like teaching it, but it's a very complicated case, right? Let's do the facts first. Who do we have next? Zainab, you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you want to give me the facts, please, in International News Service versus Associated Press, please?
So Associated Press was the plaintiff and International was the defendant, and sued for International because they said they copied one of the pieces they published.
Only one piece?
No, I think it's a couple.
Only a couple? How exactly was this copying going on?
Oh, they would look at bulletins, or they through the telephones and the telegraphs, and I think there was another one.
How was INS copying information from AP?
Sorry, I'm blanking.
All right, I'll move on. Freddie, you there? Freddie? No, Freddie. Catherine, you here?
Yes. Are you looking for the fact that they were bribing the employees to give them the
Okay, so that was one way, right? AP, obviously, INS would bribe the newspaper employees to get this information. What else did the INS do?
I have that they were copying bulletin boards and they were inducing AP members to violate their own bylaws.
Yeah, don't worry about the
news
second one. The
before
second one we'll put aside for now, right? But the third one is they were copying from bulletin boards. How did that work there, Catherine?
They would use like earlier editions of the AP's newspapers and they'd sell it or they'd rewrite it.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you, Catherine. So there are different types of cheating going on here, right? INS would bribe employees to release stuff that hasn't been published yet. That was illegal. No one really disputed that, right? You can't do that. You can't start bribing employees, right? You can't go about doing that. But the second, or actually it was the third approach, was a little bit more controversial. AP would publish newspapers. They publish what we call early editions. Imagine like, a newspaper comes out at 6 a.m. in New York, and they would put it on a bulletin board in New York City in Times Square, right? That information was released to the public. It was in the open. Then you'd have INS reporters write down the information and telegraph that information to newspapers out west. So imagine it's 6 a.m. in New York. It's only 3 a.m. in San Francisco. And they were able to publish a morning edition in San Francisco with all these stories. AP was not given credit. AP was not paid for this information. They were just taking it. So the question becomes, does AP have a property right in the information it was publishing? Now, let me knock out one obvious answer. There was no copyright. AP could have copyrighted their newspaper articles. They were allowed to under the law, but they didn't. Why? It took too much time. They published thousands of articles a month, right? They didn't have enough time to go and copyright every single article. It's just, it takes too much time. It's not worth it. There's another reason why. The information is only valuable for one day. Who would ever buy a 2-day-old newspaper, right? No one. I mean, you buy a newspaper, at least in the day, and you throw it out. It's once you read it. The information wasn't current. The value of news was that it was current. So there was no federal protection for copyright because they never registered. So then what is this case even about? This is why I hate this case. It's not really a property case. It's not entirely a property case. It's an unfair competition case, right? It involves property, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's really an unfair competition case. What the court holds is that there is no property right for published information, right? If I'm a member of the public and I go buy a newspaper and I read an article, I can talk about it, right? I can tell my friend, hey, I read this article in the newspaper, right? I can say, oh yeah, in the war, here's what happened overseas. But when you have competitors, INS and AP, there's different standards. INS can't unfairly compete with the AP. And here's where property comes into it. AP does not have a property right of its published information when it goes out to the public, right? There's no property right there. But the AP does have a property right against its competitors. I said again. The AP has a property right for its published information against its competitors. The court calls this quasi-property, quasi, Q-U-A-S-I, quasi-property. What is quasi-property? the court doesn't explain. Did anyone notice that? Right? They said quasi-property, and that's it. They didn't say what the hell it was, which is why I hate this case. I mean, it's a good case, but it leaves students hanging. So let me try to fill in what Justice Malon Pitney, one of the more inconsequential justices of the 20th century, sorry, it's true, what Justice Pitney wrote. Quasi means almost, or maybe constructive. I think Emily defined that for us earlier in class, right? Constructive means not actually, but sort of, kind of, right? It's like you constructive service of process. Remember that from Civ Pro? Sounds familiar. Quasi-property means it's not an actual property right established by law, but the courts will enforce it in this context. Here, the court basically made up a property right. They made it up. They made it up. It's completely fictional, right? This was not created by Congress. I'm going to scare you. Erie doctrine. I'm sorry. Are federal courts to be creating common law? Well, not anymore. They're not. Here they did. Here the court basically made up a federal common law property right. They just made it up. It's not a thing, right? And if you read the notes after the case, you'll see that the courts have largely ignored this doctrine. It still comes up every now and then. I am not giving you this case to show what the current status of the law is. That's not why this case is in your book. And by the way, it's in every, I've checked, it's in every property case book. It's not just ours. So everyone uses it. The reason why this case is in our book is it illustrates the labor theory, right? The idea that when you put all this work into gathering news, your competitor should not be able to copy it from you, right? You reward the labor. You create the incentives to gather this news by giving them a property right. Of course, who's supposed to make this decision? Is it the courts or is it the legislature? And here the courts made it up on their own, which is why it's almost certainly wrong. The case was actually 5-3. So it was actually, one justice had recused. It was actually pretty close. This was not a unanimous decision. And I think the majority probably got it wrong, but you know, that's not important. All right. I'm sorry I had to lecture a bit. I wanted to make sure I got through the end of the case, but I think I got through just everything I wanted today. I'll start the minute poll now. But are there any questions before we wrap up? And I'll summarize in a bit. Yes, go ahead. I see a hand. Is that Derek?
Hey, Josh, how would you have ruled on this case?
I would have been in dissent. I think I would have said that, as a federal court, it's not our position to create property rights. If Congress wants to legislate this area, they can. There was a potential to get a copyright. They didn't do it, so they shouldn't be able to complain. Justice Holmes wrote a very useful dissent where he said, well, if INS wants these information, they have to credit AP. In other words, they have to say in their story, AP wrote this. Or they only need to give credit if the story is a few hours old. So if it's like, 24 hours after it happens, it's the public domain, which might be a reasonable solution. But I think in my view, which is not very important, Congress should have entertained here. I'm not sure the federal court has this power. The state court perhaps different, but IP is really it's really a federal matter under our Constitution. Thanks for the question. You don't want me as a judge. It's a very bad idea. That'd be very dangerous for the world. Just keep me in the classroom with my little Zoom cubes. All right. So let me try to wrap up and summarize for a bit. The minute poll's running. The rule of capture cannot be refined to a single definition. It's very context specific, and it seems for every type of wild resource you're trying to catch is a different rule. Zach, maybe I'll get you after I finish up. Okay. There are many different types of rules of capture. For the creation doctrine, I think the INS case is useful to show how courts still look for labor theory, how they still consider labor theory in their determinations, even when they perhaps shouldn't. Okay. All right. That's all I have. You're welcome to go. Zach, I'm happy to answer your question, but if you need to leave, don't feel encumbered to stick around.
No, I'm just trying to answer the last question because nothing's coming up on my end. All I see is
there's nothing there. It's just when I click the minute poll, it takes a screenshot of wherever I'm looking at. That's why it's there.
Okay. So
yeah, there's no question. It's just you type whatever's on your mind, questions you have, thoughts you have. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. I'm sorry. The way that the iClicker software works is whatever's on my screen is what you see. So I can't like say show nothing. That's what's there. Okay. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. If you have any questions, I'll be in office hours today around 2:45 or so. A couple of you came on Monday. I was very happy to see you and hope to see you all soon. Thank you.